to meet the demands of the Green New Deal, which proposes to convert the U.S. economy to zero emissions, renewable power by 2030, there will be a lot more of these mines gouged into the crust of the earth. That's because nearly every renewable energy source depends upon non-renewable and frequently hard to access minerals. Solar panels use indium, turbines use neodymium, batteries use lithium, and all require kilotons of steel, tin, silver, and copper. The renewable energy supply chain is a complicated hopscotch around the periodic table and around the world. To make one high-capacity solar panel, one might need copper from Chile, indium from Australia, gallium from China, and selenium from Germany. Many of the most efficient direct drive wind turbines require a couple of pounds of rare earth metal neodymium, and there is 140 pounds of lithium in every Tesla. It's not for nothing that coal miners were, for much of the 19th and 20th centuries, the very image of capitalist immiseration. It's exhausting, dangerous, ugly work. The voracious one, that is what Emile Zola names the coal mine in Germinal, his novel of class struggle in a French company town. I'm not going to do this long quote about coal mining, but in capitalism, what's monstrous is Earth as animated by those civilizing energies in exchange for these terrestrial treasures used to power trains and ships and factories. A whole class of people is thrown into the pits. The warming earth teems with such monsters of our own making, monsters of drought and migration, famine and storms. Renewable energy is no refuge. Really, the worst industrial accident in the history of the United States, the Hawk's Nest incident of 1930, was a renewable energy disaster. Drilling a 3-mile-long inlet for a Union Carbine hydroelectric plant. 5,000 workers, when they were sickened when they hit a thick vein of silica filling the tunnel with blinding white dust. Good Lord. Anyway, moving along from that, the infrastructure of the modern world is cast from molted grief, dotted with death villages, another new term, along with areas of high smoke, dotted with death villages where crops will not fruit. The region of Inner Mongolia, where the Bayan Obo mine is located, displays Chernobyl-esque cancer rates. But then again, the death villages are already here. More of them are coming if we don't do something about climate change. What matter is a dozen death villages when half the earth may be rendered uninhabitable? What matters the gray skies over Inner Mongolia if the alternative is turning the sky an endless white with sulfuric aerosols, as last-ditch geoengineering scenarios imagine? Well, why don't we just cover the skies with areas of high smoke. This seems to be a fine way to reflect the sunlight. Let's just burn the planet with more wildfires. Anyway, getting back to Jasper's analysis, moralists, armchair philosophers, and lesser evilists may try to convince you that these situations resolve into a sort of trolley car problem. Do nothing and the trolley speeds down the track toward mass death. Do something, can you say the Green New Deal or geoengineering or whatever, just do something and you switch the trolley onto a track where fewer people die, but where you are more actively responsible for their deaths. When the survival of millions or even billions hangs in the balance, as it surely does when it comes to climate change, a few dozen death villages might seem a particularly good deal, a new deal. But climate change does not resolve into a single trolley car problem. Rather, it is a planet-spanning tangle of switch yards with mass death on every track. It's not clear we can even get enough of this stuff out of the ground, however, given the time frame. Zero emission 2030 would mean mines producing now, not in 5 or 10 years. The race to bring new supply online is likely to be ugly in more ways than one, as slipshod producers scramble to cash in on the price bonanza, cutting every corner and setting up mines that are dangerous, unhealthy, and not particularly green. Mines require a massive outlay of investment up front, and they typically feature low return on investment, except during the sort of commodity boom. We can expect a Green New Deal to produce. It can be a decade or more before the sources are developed, and another decade before they turn a profit. Nor is it clear how much the fruits of these mines will help us decarbonize if energy use keeps climbing. Just because a United States encrusted in solar panels releases no greenhouse gases, that does not mean its technologies are carbon neutral. It takes energy to get those minerals out of the ground, energy to shape them into batteries and photovoltaic solar panels and giant rotors for windmills, energy to dispose of them when they wear out. Mines are worked primarily by gas-burning vehicles. The container ships that cross the world seas bearing the good freight of renewables burns so much fuel they are responsible alone for 3% of planetary emissions. Electric, battery-driven motors for construction equipment and container ships are barely in the prototype stage. And what kind of massive battery would you need to get a container ship across the Pacific Ocean? Maybe a small nuclear reactor would be best. Counting emissions within national boundaries, in other words, is like counting calories, but only during breakfast and lunch. If going clean in the U.S. makes other places dirtier, then you have to add that to the ledger. The carbon sums are sure to be lower than they would be otherwise, but the reductions might not be as robust as thought, especially if producers desperate to cash in on the renewable jackpot do things as cheaply and quickly as possible, which for now means fossil fuels. On the other side, environmental remediation is costly in every way. Want to clean up those tailing ponds? Bury the waste deep underground. Keep the water table from being poisoned. You're going to need motors, and you're probably going to burn oil. Consolidating scientific opinion, the most recent IPCC report projects that biofuels are going to be used in these cases for construction, for industry, and for transport wherever motors can't be easily electrified. Biofuels put carbon into the air, but it's carbon that was already absorbed by the growing plants, so the net emissions are zero. And guys, I have never gone along with this. The problem is that growing the biofuels requires land otherwise devoted to crops or carbon-absorbing wilderness. They are among, meaning biofuels, are among the least dense of power sources. You would need a dozen acres to fill the tank of one single intercontinental jet. Emissions are only the most prominent aspect of our broader ecological crisis. Thank you. Human habitation, pasture, and industry branching through the remaining wilderness in the most profligate and destructive manner has sent shockwaves through the plant and animal kingdoms. The mass die-off of insects, with populations decreasing by 4/5 in some areas, is one part of this. The insect world is very poorly understood, but scientists suspect these die-offs and extinction events are only partially attributable to climate change, with human land use and pesticides a major culprit. Of the 2 billion tons of animal mass on the planet, insects account for half. Pull the pillar of the insect world away, and the food chain collapses. And of course, what he's saying here, that none of this has anything to do with emissions. To replace current U.S. energy consumption with renewables, you would need to devote at least 25 to 50% of the U.S. landmass to solar, wind, and biofuels. I don't know why he left hydroelectric out of that. According to the estimates made by Vaclav Smil, the grand doyen of energy studies. Is there room for that and expanding human habitation? For that and pasture? For a massive meat and dairy industry? For that and the forest we would need to take carbon out of the air? Not if capitalism keeps doing the thing which it cannot stop doing. Grow. The law of capitalism is the law of more energy, more stuff, more materials. It introduces efficiencies only to more effectively despoil the planet. Thank you. Capitalism introduces efficiencies only to more effectively despoil the planet. There is no solution to the climate crisis which leaves capitalism's compulsion to growth intact. And this is what the Green New Deal, a term coined by that oily neoliberal Thomas Friedman, does not address. The Green New Deal thinks you can keep capitalism, keep growth, but remove the deleterious consequences. The death villages are here to tell you that you cannot. No roses will bloom on this bush. Miners in Chile, China, and Zambia will be digging in the earth for more than just the making of 50 million solar panels and windmills, however, since the Green New Deal also proposes to rebuild the power grid in a more efficient form, to upgrade all buildings to the highest environmental standards, and lastly, to develop a low-carbon transportation infrastructure based on electric vehicles and high-speed rail. This would involve, needless to say, a monumental deployment of carbon-intensive materials like concrete and steel. Trillions of dollars of raw materials would need to flow into the United States alone to be shaped into train tracks and electric cars. Schools and hospitals too, since alongside these green initiatives, the Green New Deal proposes universal health care and free education, not to mention a living wage jobs guarantee. Anyway, guys, I'm just going to have to skip forward from here and just read a few paragraphs. You really need to go on the link here and educate yourself about the Green New Deal, just in case you are suffering any delusion that anybody listening to Collapse Chronicles still is harboring any hopium-soaked delusion that the Green New Deal is the answer to the collapse of a planet. You have got to go here for some remedial treatment to your confused brain. Then what he does, he spends a lot of time saying why the Green New Deal is nothing like the original New Deal. Advocates, and I'd say I'm just picking a few paragraphs as I go through this long essay. Advocates of green growth promise a, quote, absolute decoupling of emissions and growth, where each additional unit of energy adds no CO2 to the atmosphere. Even if such a thing were technologically possible, even if it were possible to generate zero or low emission energy, not only adequate but in excess of current demand, such decoupling would require far greater power on the behavior of capitalists than the New Deal ever mustered. Then the problem with the scenario as a framework for the Green New Deal is that renewables are not massively cheaper than fossil fuels. The state cannot blaze the trail to cheap renewable energy, satisfying consumers with lower cost and producers with acceptable profits. Many once thought that the depletion of oil and coal reserves would save us, raising the price of fossil fuels above that of renewables and forcing the switch as a matter of economic necessity. Unfortunately, that messianic price point has drifted farther into the future as new drilling technologies, can you say fracking, have made it possible to frack oil from shale and to recover reserves from fields previously thought exhausted. The price of oil has stayed stubbornly low, and the U.S. is now, to the surprise of everyone, producing more of it than anyone else. The doomsday scenarios of peak oil are now a turn of the millennium curiosity like Y2K or Al Gore. Sorry, wrong. Apocalypse. And then he destroys the whole myth about how renewables can compete with fossil fuels on the open market. He breaks all of this down, how the open market is never going to respond the way these opium addicts say it will. Then we talk about taxing carbon. We talk about stranded assets. Good Lord, this man has done his homework. Moving ahead. Like a 1,000-page novel with a MacGuffin or stylistic outrage on every page, the Green New Deal presents a challenge for its critics. There are just so many levels on which it will never work. There is an infinity of words in which the Green New Deal fails. 1 million President Sanders, or with more urgency, Ocasio-Cortez's presiding over the disaster. One might write an entire essay, for example, about its political impossibility given the complete saturation of the U.S. state by corporate interest and a party system and division of powers that lists badly to the right. Another essay about how, even if it were politically possible, outlays on the order of several trillion dollars per year would most likely wreck the dollar, driving up projected cost. An essay about vested interest and the war they would wage. An essay about how, even if you cleared those hurdles, the history of recent monetary interventions into the economy, $4.5 trillion injected into the economy during Obama's tenure by the Fed's quantitative easing, $1.5 trillion for Trump's cuts, indicates that the Green New Deal will struggle to encourage corporations to spend this money as intended on investment in green infrastructure rather than funneling it straight into real estate and stocks, as has happened in all these prior cases. In each of these scenarios, on each of these sad warming planets, the Green New Deal fails because of capitalism, because In capitalism, a small class of owners and managers in competition with itself finds itself forced to make a set of narrow decisions about where to invest and in what, establishing prices, blah, blah, blah. And then he just basically breaks down how the Green New Deal and capitalism they just aren't two peas. They just aren't going to work together. So he goes on a rail against capitalism, and basically pointing out, just to cut to the chase, what he's saying here is that the Green New Deal, it's still, we can have our cake and eat it too. It does not tackle growth. It is just growth as usual. It is lipstick on a pig. Back to Jasper. I suspect many advocates of the Green New Deal know all of this. They don't really think it will happen as promised, and they know that if it does happen, it won't work. This is probably why there's so little concrete detail being offered. Discussion so far has largely revolved around the question of budgeting, blah, blah, blah. Don't get me wrong, budget items on the order of tens of trillions of dollars are a big deal, but securing the bag is hardly the biggest problem. Implementation is where it really dies, and few advocates have much to say about such details. The Green New Deal proposes to decarbonize most of the economy in 10 years. Great, but no one is talking about how. This is because for many its value is primarily rhetorical. It's about shifting the discussion, gathering political will, and underscoring the urgency of the climate crisis. It's more big mood than grand plan. Then he starts talking about them socialist, and it's not going to work under socialism anymore. He takes a big swipe at transitional communities, breaks that all down. Okay, getting towards the bottom. Let's say what we know to be true. The pathway to climate stabilization below 2 degrees Celsius offered by the Green New Deal is illusory. Indeed, at present, the only solutions possible within the framework of capitalism are ghastly, risky forms of geoengineering, chemically poisoning either the ocean or the sky to absorb carbon or limit sunlight, preserving capitalism and its host, humanity, at the cost of the sky, now weatherless, or the ocean, now lifeless. Unlike emissions reductions, such projects will not require international collaborations. Any country could begin geoengineering right now. What's to stop China or the U.S. from deciding to dump sulfur into the sky if things get hot enough and bad enough? The problem with the Green New Deal is that it promises to change everything while keeping everything the same. It promises to switch out the energetic basis of modern society, as if one were changing the battery in a car. You still get to buy a new iPhone every 2 years, but zero emissions. The world of the Green New Deal is this world, but better. This world, but with zero emissions, universal health care, and free college. The appeal is obvious, but the combination impossible. We cannot remain in this world to preserve the ecological niche in which we and our cohort of species have lived for the last 11,000 years. We will have to completely reorganize society, changing where and how, and most importantly, why we live. Given current technology, there is no possibility to continue using more energy per person, more land per person, and more per person.
To Jasper and Sam reading Jasper, and I'll return in a very short while to this essay. So, I will try to explain a very simple concept. This is just the temperature for June, the month of June in Oslo, Norway. And I've charted a 4-day average in red, and a 5-day average, and a 10-day average, and you will understand in a short while why I've done that. And the blue dots here are the daily temperatures in June, and you can see it's in the 4-day it's very up and down, and the moving average is very, random, as you would expect from natural variation and weather blowing north and south, and normal June in Norway anyway. And it's kind of the same thing with the 5-day average. It's up and down like a roller coaster, but when you go up to the 10-year average, you get a more steadily rising temperature. And if you were to, for any reason, you wanted to prove that June is in general getting warmer and warmer, you would go for a 10-day average to emphasize that point. And the reason for that is that the randomness or the natural variation, it evens out. Then you have a longer average, and in the next slide you will see what I'm sort of getting at with this basic understanding. The longer the average, the more you can see the actual trend. Of course, for the temperature in Oslo, it's related to more and stronger sunlight for longer hours as you go towards summer solstice, and it keeps getting warmer after solstice in June and in July, because the ocean water is heating up, and so there is a sort of a lag. It's a delay before you get to the warmest day in statistical measurements, which is about the last week of July. I think it's the statistical warmest day on average in Oslo. So the longer the average is, the more even, or the more clearly you can see the trend. Okay, so in the next slide you will see what we're really getting at, and that is 4, 5, and 10 year averages or trends for Arctic sea ice. And I also included the 3-year trend because surprisingly that also came to a new milestone, mainly due to us being record low for sea ice volume these days and these weeks. So even the 3-year got to a new record low milestone at 13.4 thousand cubic kilometers. Okay, so you see the same thing here as with the Oslo temperatures in June. That the shorter the trend, the average, the more roller coaster up and down you get. And as you move to longer trends, those ups and downs even out more and more. And when you come to the 10-year average, it's sufficiently straight so you can see the long-term trend for Arctic sea ice and also for the temperature in June in Oslo. So then you have a more clear picture, I would say, of how the ice is behaving and in what direction we are going. And yeah, if you know my channel, Going South, I would say, of course, we are going south. We are going straight to hell in a handbasket. We're going down, and there is no turning back. So the point of no return, whether that's in the 80s or 70s or 60s, 1960s, that's a tipping point for the sea ice in the Arctic. And there hasn't been so far anything that humans have done collectively that has worked to change that trend. It's just been pedal to the metal, pump as much oil and gas as we can, and open new coal mines in Germany and Australia. You know, it's just insanity. So to segue back to the essay by Jasper, I agree totally with Sam Mitchell. It's one of the best pieces ever written about the new proposed Green New Deal on the left side of American politics. And far be it from me to meddle in American politics. I mean, you don't want to do that kind of thing, right? Because clearly certain elements of the American public doesn't appreciate meddling from outsiders. But I would like to add to Jasper's analysis about the Green New Deal being, or let's say the climate, the stated climate goals, climate policy goals of the Green New Deal, which Jasper argues are unrealistic and not really thought through. And I think he also argues that no one even on the left actually expect those climate policies to succeed, which is interesting because it's being sold to us as the solution for the climate collapse crisis that humanity is in. And if even the people who are promoting it and suggesting it don't believe in the climate part of it, which I would say was, has to be a huge part of it, then, why are they doing it? And from my own data analysis of the Arctic, I have found the many decades ago tipping point or point of no return. As I said, the 80s, 70s, 1960s, maybe even the 1950s. That's when it was too late to change this. So I would not only agree with Jasper, I would go one up on Jasper and say, yeah, it was impossible even before they started plotting the Green New Deal, because there doesn't seem to be anything we can do. This is like physics. It's not about politics or changing people's hearts and minds. This is about a tide that came in, and we missed the tide going out, just like those poor fish in that tidal pool that I showed earlier. And we should have, or my parents or my grandparents should have done something, way back. But now it's and the I think the important thing to say here is that we definitely don't want another bonanza of building high-speed railways all over the globe, with all of the ecological consequences of that, and all the mining and all the crazy human activity all of that would cause, just to fulfill a plan that wouldn't solve the core stated problem at all anyway, because the way I and many other deep ecologists view this planet is that we are not the only species. We are one out of maybe 100 billion or maybe 1 trillion different species on the planet, and what we need to save is not only civilization or not only humans. We actually need to save the living environment, the living space for all of these creatures, and maybe rather than trying to tackle climate change and climate collapse, we should try to realize that this milk is already spilt. There's nothing we can do about it. We can cry over the spilt milk, like the Democratic Party in America or the Extinction Rebellion movement. But I think the more sort of forward-thinking option is to say, okay, let's run this climate collapse. It solves the problem of human civilization. That will be over in a very short while. Maybe that will give us a better chance at saving all the rest of the planet, which is not civilized and not human. And then hopefully there will be a small niche or a small habitat for surviving humans in that future world. But I don't think trying to stop the very, very fast-moving climate change that you see depicted in this graph, I don't think that's what we should spend our last precious years and weeks and hours on. That would be really, really foolish, and especially not trying to fulfill a pie in the sky Green New Deal dream. That wouldn't solve the climate problem anyway, and only would occupy more land and destroy more habitat for other species of life on this planet. So yeah, I agree with Jasper, but I agree even more than Jasper, I would say. Okay.
So Tucker Carlson had some moments where he was against war, and it was good to see. He took on John Bolton directly, and he's repeatedly repped that position to his credit, that he doesn't think we should do offensive wars. And that's wonderful. That is certainly better than anybody else in that time slot on Fox would ever do. We know that if Tucker Carlson's replaced in that spot, it's going to be somebody who's not only wrong and bad on all the other issues, they will also likely be advocating for war nonstop. So you have to give credit where credit is due on that front. However, having said that, man, does he swing and miss a lot, and does he have some terrible takes. Like his vicious attack on Ilhan Omar, which was totally uncalled for and honestly deeply bigoted. You can go back and watch the segment I did on that where I explain that in detail and I show his comments. Well, now this is equally terrible. He's talking about climate change and the Green New Deal, and certainly at least flirting with climate change denial. And his attack on the Green New Deal almost strikes me as dense on purpose. Now, maybe it's just a misunderstanding, but I have a hard time believing that, because he would have to be a lot dumber than I think he is to come to the conclusion that he came to. So let's take a look and then we'll break it down.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight this Friday. The thing about climate change is it's serious stuff, very serious. It's not like the frivolous concerns that fill your days, like paying your bills or keeping your marriage together or putting your kids through school or fighting cancer. Climate change is bigger than that, way bigger. It's about saving the Earth. It's about taking on what we're going to call an existential threat to humanity. It's a big deal, man. Nobody understands the gravity of climate change with quite the soul-searing intensity of freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. When Ocasio-Cortez talks about climate change and the Green New Deal she promises will save us from climate change, she often looks like she's going to start to cry or start to yell or both. And why wouldn't she? It's scary as hell. Time is running out.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. Like, this is the war. This is our World War II.
Now, you can disagree with the details of the Green New Deal she's proposing, banning cars and airplanes, for example, shutting down the entire American energy sector, rebuilding every dwelling in the United States. You can disagree with that. But what you can't question is Ocasio-Cortez's sincerity. When she talks about climate change, clearly she really means it. Or does she? This is a man called Saikat Chakrabarty. He's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's chief of staff over in the Congress. He personally led the writing of the Green New Deal. The Washington Post just profiled Chakrabarty. In the interview, Chakrabarty made a stunning admission. All that stuff about the world ending, 12 years to save the planet, it was all a lie. Chakrabarty is not worried about humanity's demise. The Green New Deal has nothing to do with that. Here's what he told the paper. Quote, "The interesting thing about the Green New Deal is it wasn't originally a climate thing at all." Do you guys think of it as a climate thing? Because we really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing. End quote. That's about as direct as it could be. The Green New Deal is not designed to save the world. It's not about the environment at all. It's about power. Chakrabarty and Ocasio-Cortez want control of the American economy. They went looking for an issue that would justify a hostile takeover of the economy. Climate change seems scary, so they went with that. It's remarkable they're admitting this, but we shouldn't be surprised. It's happening. This kind of thing happens all the time. Manufacturing crises is the last preferred way to exert control over the country. A decade ago, for example, only wackos in bed sheets were called racists. Then, during the last election, Donald Trump was denounced as a racist. Now Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden are being written off as racists. What's going on here? It's not like there's more racism in the country. In fact, there's much less than there used to be. What changed is that the left realized they could gain power by creating boogeymen, by scaring you. Stupefy the masses with fear-mongering. By the time they've recovered, you're the one in charge. That's their program.
Where do I begin with this one? Goodness gracious. So what's hilarious is that he ultimately ends up doing what he's accusing Shoykat Chakrabarti and AOC of doing. He's like, oh, they just want power, and they're just using fear to try to control you. The whole point of your segment is to try to fearmonger about Shoykat and the Green New Deal and act like, ooh, there's this nefarious plot because they want power and they want control of the economy. Yes. Tucker, you're smart enough to know the point that Shoykat was making, even though you're pretending not to know the point he's making. He's trying to make it nefarious, like, ooh, they want control of the economy. So you're fear-mongering. It's not them, you're fear-mongering. The point is that the Green New Deal, you know that part that says New Deal in it? Well, the New Deal part of the Green New Deal, the original intention, the thought was, well, why don't we make the Green New Deal like a New Deal? So, in other words, the main focus of this Green New Deal is hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of new jobs created in the same way that the New Deal created colossal numbers of jobs because we were in a depression and people were struggling, and FDR said, yeah, I'm going to use the depression to rework the economy, but rework it in the interests of working people and regular people who've been left behind and who've been screwed by the system and screwed by the gangsters on Wall Street. So I, FDR, am going to do the New Deal and build infrastructure in this country and give people jobs. That's exactly what Shoykat means when he's talking about, oh, the Green New Deal. The original idea wasn't just to focus on the climate. It was to rework the economy. Yes. So the idea is use the Green New Deal to give people jobs, have a jobs program, create infrastructure all around this country. So the Green New Deal is more of a New Deal. Give people jobs, improve their lives, and make us a thriving social democracy. That's the idea. Now, I know it sounds a lot less scary and a lot less sexy when somebody who's in the room for those conversations, tells you what really goes on. But again, that's what I think he's smart enough to know that he's fear-mongering here. He's smart enough to know that this is nonsense. This idea of like, they just want power and control of the economy. Be afraid. Be very afraid. Yes, be afraid. We might end up like a terrible, downtrodden country like Sweden or Norway. More people might be employed with decent paying jobs. The horror! We might copy one of the best programs that was ever done by the U.S. government, the New Deal. How can we live like this? What are you doing, man? Stick to just speaking out against wars, please. Because I'll tell you something, you're tolerable when you're going after neocons, okay? I like it when you go after neocons. You know what I don't like? You fear-mongering about basic social democratic reforms as you pretend like it's Shoykat who's fear-mongering and AOC who's fear-mongering. By the way, are you a climate change denier? Just stop being a weasel and just come out and say it. I'm asking you. I'm not proclaiming, oh, Tucker Carlson doesn't believe in climate change. I am sincerely and genuinely asking you because to your average viewer of this segment, they are going to go away saying it appears like he's very skeptical of climate change. It appears like he's not so sure it's real. Or he might be one of these people who says, oh, it's real, but what can we do about it? Humans didn't cause it and humans can't fix it. Because that's the vibe I get from your segment here. But you can come out and tell us, and you could say, hey, Kyle, you're wrong. I do believe in it. Hey, fine, man. By all means, if you believe in it, wonderful. But this certainly comes across as the opposite. It certainly comes across as you're at the very least skeptical. And there's also a lot of stuff in there that's just flat out far-right propaganda that's not even close to true, as if the New Deal or the Green New Deal has banning cars and airplanes. You know where they got that from, right? They got that from the idea that we're saying, hey man, we have to totally get off fossil fuels in a relatively short time frame, whether it be 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. We don't have a choice because we're in a climate crisis and we can't fuck around anymore. So we have to get off of fossil fuels. They take that as, oh, well, then in order to get off of fossil fuels, you obviously can't have airplanes because airplanes run on fossil fuels, so therefore you want to ban airplanes. They do these leaps of logic, and then they act like everybody should just take it and be like, oh, I guess that's what they meant with the Green New Deal. No, it's not. It's obviously not what we mean. We're obviously not in favor of banning airplanes. We're obviously not in favor of banning cars. I mean, the fact that they would make such a bold-faced lie and act like, you know, there's going to be no pushback and, like, this is the truth, it's honestly embarrassing. That's one thing that the right has over the left in a way that helps them, which is their total and complete lack of shame. Like, they will just accuse the other side of insane things, like back with the Obamacare death panels, when the real death panels are the private insurance industry, by the way. But, like, they'll accuse them of insane things and then repeat it enough where people go, I guess that's what they mean. I guess AOC wants to ban cars. I guess she wants to ban airplanes, right? You're utterly ridiculous. You're profoundly ridiculous. And, of course, he also sets up this false dichotomy of, like, oh, you know, these Democrats think climate change is so crazy and so bad and so much more important than, you know, crazy things like paying your bills. Why would you set up a false dichotomy like that? The reality is, you know who's actually fighting for people to be able to pay their bills? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's in favor of a living wage and a right to a union. She's in favor of wages going up. Bernie Sanders is in favor of those things. Are you? Are you? Are you for a living wage? Are you for a right to a union? Are you in favor of all these proposals that would raise wages across the country or not? Because he sets up this false dichotomy as if, like, well, the Republicans are the serious people and they're the ones in favor of raising wages, and the Democrats are so silly and ridiculous that they're all trotting around talking about climate change and that's it. That's not true at all. The Republicans are not in favor of raising wages. They're not in favor of a living wage. They're not in favor of a right to a union. And the Democrats are. Or at least the good Democrats, the Justice Democrats are. So, this is like gross propaganda. So, listen, I said it once, I'll say it again. Tucker, just focus on wars, buddy. Just focus on wars, because you're tolerable when you're going against neocons. But when you're doing grotesque propaganda like this, as you pretend like it's Shoykot who's doing propaganda, man, is it insufferable.
Insufferable or not, it's always interesting when the same thing is criticized from two very different angles. One intellectual green angle and one mainstream entertainment angle. Maybe you could say a right-wing angle. I don't know if what Tucker Carlson says is true or not. It may be true, it may not be true, but it seems to me that the combined criticism by Tucker and Jasper of the Green New Deal from two different angles, it seems to me that they are onto something. It's not going to solve the climate crisis, and it was maybe not even meant to solve the climate crisis, and it definitely can't solve the climate crisis. So Tucker's suggestion is that it was just a what do you call it? It was just casus belli for a total makeover of the US economy, which the American left or the Democrat Party wants, and they want to create millions of jobs, and those millions of jobs will build new railways and try to develop battery-driven airplanes and container ships, and you know, it will be just another industrial adventure, another industrial revolution, and it's basically just, as Jasper says, it's about having the cake and eat it too, you know. So it's just politicians doing business as usual. You know, they will say anything, they will lie, they will do and say anything in order to get you to vote for them. And they won't keep their promises, and the climate promise isn't even possible to keep. And of course, I, as a sort of green anarchist, I'm a paying member of the Norwegian Green Party, but I never vote for them because I think their policies would be terrible for Norway and for the planet. But at least I'm not siding with the left or the right in America. I'm more like a green anarchist in the middle, condemning it all, condemning everything. And I always appreciate criticism of different things, from everything from communists criticizing something to right-wing people criticizing the Green New Deal, because the criticism can often be correct or it can be helpful, even though you would never agree with that person speaking that criticism. You would never vote for their party, but they, especially when you get criticism from different angles, different ideological bases, you can see more clearly the object that is under criticism. In this case, the Green New Deal, and it doesn't look very beautiful. You know, if it's not going to solve any environmental or climatic problems, it only means that they will spend billions and billions of dollars building all kinds of infrastructure in America and around the world, almost like the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. And they will build all of these things and destroy all of these habitats, only to be shut down abruptly at any given year during the project, almost like you can see at some, you know, holiday resorts or whatever that just stopped building the high-rises because of some economic crisis or something. It would just be skeletons of unfinished projects. So the whole Green New Deal and the Chinese Belt and Road plan, they will spend the last precious years of civilization doing incredible damage to the natural world and bring thousands and millions of species to extinction in projects that will never be finished. They will never run high-speed trains on those projects, on those rail lines. And this is not the way forward. We should do something else, and we should rather look into something like deep adaptation or some other inner work to prepare for this crisis. And I don't have all the answers. I only chart some data from the Arctic. I'm not a guru in anything, but at least what I'm doing, it helps me to be able to call bullshit on this Green New Deal. It will never fulfill its promises. Okay, bye.
Natural Progressive. So I want to talk about the problems with the Green New Deal. Of course, I have no issue trying to save our planet. That is my biggest issue. I want to save the planet. At this point, I really don't think that is even possible. But I don't want to make it worse faster, and that's my concern. So the problem I have with the Green New Deal, which is very controversial, and I know I lose subscribers. God, I hope you can't see my... Okay, can't see it. Good. The problem I have with the Green New Deal is it's all economy based. It's based on growing. And our planet is being eaten up by housing, by, food supply, by everything, like energy. It's just being eaten by humans. And to pretend that we can grow the economy and save the planet at the same time is a complete and utter disaster. We can't do that. You got to think through this. You got to think through it smart. You can't just say, yay, we elect these certain people and bam, windmills appear, solar panels appear everywhere, and we just go straight to a green economy. That's not reality. I really hope I can get this across. It's not reality. In order to build solar panels, in order to build windmills, it will take fossil fuels. In order to rebuild our entire infrastructure, it will take an enormous amount of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels and the minerals needed, the copper, the cobalt, all this stuff that is needed for solar panels, the metal that's needed for the windmills, the transportation. There's no electric vehicle at this point that can haul a giant windmill from one place to the other. Not to mention what the windmills do once you take over another entire ecosystem to place them there. Every little bit of land we take up is taking from the biosphere. This is very important to understand. We do not live in a bubble. We need other species to survive ourselves. So we cannot continue to kill off the biosphere, other species, other mammals, other insects, other plants, and expect to survive ourselves. All the technology in the world is not going to replace nature. So I really encourage people to rethink the Green New Deal, maybe not push it so much, maybe instead push reduction in energy, because so far everywhere they've put up solar panels and wind and all that, they have not reduced the fossil fuel use. They've only increased energy use. So the more renewable, which really isn't that renewable, energy you put out there, the more energy people use. The more corporations take advantage of that energy. What we need to totally focus on is reducing our energy use and reducing population, as unpopular as that is. That's what needs to happen. I mean, we're grasping at straws right now because it's pretty much a losing battle no matter what we do. So the least we can do is respect what's left of nature and quit destroying it for our comfort. I detest the fact that people would rather keep their comforts than keep the planet, and they'd rather see the children that are being born now die a suffering, hard death than reduce their comfort level. Just reduce your comfort level just a little bit. For Christ's sake. But it has to happen on a planet-wide basis, and I don't believe that's going to happen. So I don't know. I don't know what to do, guys. I really don't. I'm just distraught when people keep pushing the Green New Deal, thinking it's our savior. Any plan that wants to grow the economy is going to destroy more of nature, and that's just a fact. It's a flat fact. When people do better, they buy more things. And when they buy more things, the things come from destruction of the planet. consumerism, everything, eating meat, all that stuff is destroying our planet. It's destroying it. So think about it. Think long and hard about what it would take to implement what they currently have as the Green New Deal. Believe me when I say there are lobbyists in the wind industry, there are lobbyists in the solar industry, and they don't have yours or my best interests at heart. They don't have the next generation's best interests at heart. It's all about the money. It's all about that. I don't know if I can convince you in a short period of time, but I know our planet is dying, and I honestly don't want to be a part of making it go faster. I'm not going to push for a Green New Deal. I know it's very unpopular. Even independent media is not seeing through the greenwashing that's going on in politics on the left. It's disturbing that they shy away from anyone who speaks out against the Green New Deal. I am for the whole idea of it. I just think people need to think it through a little bit better. Just think about what it would take to rebuild all of our infrastructure. The first New Deal was devastating on the environment. I'd never realized that before. That's something I've discovered on my path of trying to figure out how to save our environment. So I'm hoping people will become more cognizant of what it actually would entail and what it would do to the other species. And my phone is ringing, so we will talk to you soon. Have a good one.